This is not my first speech, but as a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, I want to speak on behalf of hundreds of thousands of honest Australians and Queenslanders who voted for One Nation at the last election, and the vast majority of Australians who did not vote in their primary vote for the government. Now, I listen to the people and then I speak for the people, because One Nation is of the people. So let me make it very clear. We believe that money should be in people's hands, not government's hands. So why not bring the tax cuts forward? And that's a question I want to consider. But tax is an issue that's dear to my heart. It drives behaviour, and many people seem to forget that. Tax creates or chokes the environment for small business, large companies, employees and consumers. That is clear. It's well known. And yet the government seems to be forgetting it. I've said many times in the Senate and in public that the taxation system in this country is our most destructive system in Australia. It is choking our country. When we change the tax system for the better, we will change behaviours, and we will actually have smaller deficits, and I'll touch on that later today. But for now, I want to introduce another concept: productive capacity. It's what our country will produce in the future. What is the capacity of us to produce, and to produce effectively and efficiently? And there are students in the gallery from time to time in this chamber, and it is their productive capacity that I'm particularly concerned about, the future of Australia. And that's why we do not just tick and flick what the government puts up. We do what's best for our country. And I want to thank Senator Cormann for the 2 presentations he arranged from people from the Treasury, the staff of the Treasury. Great people. We got on very well, and we appreciate their advice to us and their sharing of some information. Now, it's tempting to grab hold of the tax offsets, they're not tax cuts, they're tax offsets, as a sugar hit, and a promise of bigger tax cuts after another 2 elections, more than half a decade away. And yet high energy prices right now are highly regressive and hurting the poor the most. So much for the bleating from over here from the Greens. They are in favour. They have caused the higher energy prices that are highly regressive on the poor. In the world's greatest exporter of energy, this country, we have pensioners and other most vulnerable people cannot afford energy. And I can remember, Mr. Acting Deputy President, as a high school student cycling past the Curry smelter in Curry in the Hunter Valley as it was under construction. That smelter shut down recently because of the destructiveness of the Liberal Labor policies on energy. Now, we support tax cuts, yet we want to consider the risk in getting rid of a $158 billion revenue stream and not replacing it. Why does the government lock itself and 2 future governments into a position half a decade out? And will the government guarantee no rise in GST? Tax offsets, not tax cuts, are only for people paying tax. Yet not all taxpayers, because they're really handbacks or offsets that the ATO calculates. And they don't take care of people who don't pay any tax at all, such as pensioners. So what about pensioners being choked with rising energy prices and food prices due to drought and high water prices? What about farmers, food producers, crippled with water prices? Until recently, Liberal Labor governments, and I say that deliberately, Liberal Labor governments, because it makes no real difference, and I'll show you in a minute, governments borrowing money for recurrent expenditure. That's like a family putting its grocery bill on the home loan. Why are Canberra public servants paid such huge salaries? What happened to our Constitution's competitive federalism and the accountability that it brought? I'll tell you what's happened to it. It's been destroyed. Tax offsets are a sugar hit and can be taken away from the people through electricity prices overnight, well, within 12 months. Yet infrastructure charges, which is what my leader, Senator Pauline Hanson, and I have been advocating, cannot be taken away and increase the productive capacity of our country. If the economy will benefit so much from the government's supposed tax cuts, Why are we waiting half a decade until 2024, 25? Why not do it straight away? It's all about priorities, as I'll show you, because one nation wants reality for the people of Australia. So, Mr. Acting Deputy President, I'm going to discuss some problems and then some solutions. One Nation focuses on two primary things: management of our economy today and the vision for the future. Managing today requires two components: cost of living, focusing on that, economic management, and security, in terms of who we let into the country, for example. And number two, the vision for the country's future productive capacity. Good governance, Mr. Acting Deputy President, involves stewardship, management, governorship, which is the long-term future, and trusteeship of the values of this country and our culture. So let's discuss some facts briefly. Mandate, the government says it has a mandate. The government got 1/3 of the votes, less than that in places. And certainly we have a mandate in the Senate to speak for the people who support our campaign on energy and infrastructure. And just a note to the Prime Minister, he does not tell the Senate what to do and how to do it. The Senate makes that very clear. It is under the Senate's grace that we debate issues, because the Senate is the house of the people of the states and a house of review. The debt, as I look to the members of the government over here, the debt in this country has doubled under your rule. Prime Ministers Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison. Mr. Morrison, by the way, was also the Treasurer. Prime Minister Morrison's Liberals got less votes than Mr. Turnbull's Liberals. And regional Australia now is in recession. Businesses are shut. Go to anywhere from Cunnamulla to Cairns, and you'll find shops boarded up, empty, vacant, dark, oppressive. And interest rates have just been cut to 1%. Yet credit card interest rates have been raised 1.5% to 2%. So let's turn to the Governor-General's speech recently on behalf of his government. He said, and I quote, "The government's role is to shape the environment so people can seize the opportunities." I agree completely. And he said, "We are good people." Again, I agree. Yes. And in Australia, we have amazing, resourceful, practical, innovative people. We have abundant resources. Energy. We're the world's biggest exporter of energy. Plenty of water up north. We have a great climate. Our soil is a little bit thin compared to other agricultural countries, but so much boundless resources. And yet we're led by wombats. Let's consider the poor economic management under the Liberal Labor duopoly that's destroying Australia's productive capacity and potential, and destroying our environment for investment in the future. History and the record of Liberal Labor building facades and selling them. That's the history in recent decades of our country. There's more interest in looking good than doing good. And I'll explain that in a minute too. But let's come to the primacy of energy. Energy, the number one lesson for the last 170 years since the start of the Industrial Revolution, is that ever-reducing prices of energy in real terms have led to enormous increases in human progress. That is clear. And yet under the Liberal Labor duopoly in the last 10 years, we've seen a doubling of energy prices, a reversing of the energy trend, and that will lead to the future for these kids being a decline in human progress. That's what we want to reverse, that decline. Think about these things. Renewable energy target, brought in by the Howard government, put on turbochargers by the Rudd and Gillard governments, destroying our competitiveness in this country. Network costs as a result of gold plating because of the structure of those under the now national energy market, which is really a national energy racket. Retailers making money for jam, guaranteed returns. And the national energy market not only being a dictate of bureaucrats, but able to be gamed. And companies, including foreign-owned companies, now making off like bandits while pensioners freeze. And then we have privatisation and corporatisation. I was once in favour of government getting out of just about everything. But I've come to realise when it comes to monopolies like electricity and like water, we cannot afford to have those assets in the hands of foreign-owned multinationals that don't give a damn about our country. And so what we've seen is under the old sector, under the old regime of competitive federalism, each state was responsible for its own electricity prices and reliability. And the focus of the minister in charge was to drive down the price of energy while ensuring reliability. Now, under privatisation and under corporatisation, the focus is on the boards governing those entities to drive up the price to maximise profits without adding any more value. And that is scandalous. That is now focusing energy deliverers on raising prices. And when we focus on raising prices, what do we get? Raising prices, higher prices. So we've gone from the cheapest energy in the world with a focus on declining prices to the highest electricity prices in the world with a focus on driving up the price of energy. That is simple, Mr. Acting Deputy President, but no one talks about it. Think about this example, Kilcoy. We have Chinese people, look at Chinese company wanting to buy land there and build the largest solar industrial complex in the Southern Hemisphere, perhaps the world. They want to add cadmium and lead to Brisbane's water supply, but it's not just Brisbane, it's Ipswich, it's possibly Toowoomba, it's the Gold Coast, it's Logan. More than 2.5 million people, lives threatened. We're turning productive land, high-quality prime agricultural land, into industrial wasteland with low-density energy production. And who did this? Liberal Labor did this. And who pays? The people pay. And then what we see is our coal going overseas to China to build wind turbines. And they can use our coal more cheaply than we can because of our ridiculous Liberal Labor regulations for the last 10, 15, 20 years. So they're at a competitive advantage already. They send their wind turbines to us, they send their solar panels to us, while they use our coal to generate electricity cheaply. And then we pay them subsidies to destroy our electricity network. We pay them subsidies. This would be like John Curtin as Prime Minister in 1942 when he saw the bombs falling in Darwin from the Japanese bombers, sending a cheque to the Japanese government saying, here, you might need a subsidy to help you destroy our economy. Now the Chinese, I'm not criticising them for doing that, they're making a rational decision as a result of our government's stupidity. We're subsidising the destruction of our country. Then think of property rights. Thinking of people like Dan McDonald, an honest, hard-working farmer, Farmer Sharon Lose, Bruce Wagner and Boona. John Howard, who was agnostic on climate, he even said so 7 years after he did the damage, his government stole farmers' property rights to comply with the UN's Kyoto Protocol. And you're wondering why I'm angry? Because it happened all across Queensland and most of New South Wales thanks to Bob Carr and Peter Beattie. But the initial agreement was with Rob Borbidge, the Premier of Queensland at the time in 1996 when John Howard floated this idea to comply with Kyoto and cut the guts out of our agricultural sector. And he did it deceitfully. His government did it deceitfully by avoiding the Constitution so they wouldn't have to pay compensation. This is destroying the productive capacity of our country. And who did it? The Liberal Labor duopoly. And who pays? The people pay. Liberal Labor have identical or similar political positions on climate that are driving higher energy prices. And the onus is on them to provide the data and the facts justifying their policies, because they never have. Senator Ian MacDonald from the Liberals said in 2016 in this chamber that we have never had a debate on the climate science. Never, and he is correct. They have similar policies, Liberal and Labor, on gas, abandoning Australians and Australia. High immigration numbers, Liberal and Labor. Foreign ownership, go for it, Liberal and Labor. Working together against minor and medium parties, Liberal and Labor. Prime Minister Morrison suggested Labor and Greens ahead of One Nation when it comes to preferencing. When are the Liberals and Labor Party going to merge? They're both chasing the same voters. Labor abandoned the workers. Liberals abandoned small business. The Nationals abandoned farmers and the bush. When are they going to merge? They're all chasing preferences from the Greens. Maybe they'll merge with the Greens who set the agenda. And at times they even suggest to preference the Greens first. That tells you about Liberal and Labor. Labor always preferences the Greens first. So who did this again? Liberal and Labor. And who's paying? The people. Every monopoly ever has been created by government. And that is including education, energy, and centralisation of government. The tax offsets and cuts will be chewed up in higher energy prices and water prices within 12 months. The poor need real jobs, hand-ups, not handouts. Tax rates and bracket creep mean nothing to people who have no job or lost their assets to capricious banks, as of many farmers. We have a complex tax system, needlessly complex tax system, that is made more complex because of the convoluted way that this government is now getting tax breaks to lower and middle income, which we applaud, but not necessarily the way they're doing it, while ensuring a surplus and overall longer-term bracket creep. Think of these considerations. Progressivity. Theoretically, contrary to what the Greens say, the government has maintained that. We compliment them. Bracket creep. It's cyclical. They're not doing anything about bracket creep, just putting it off for another day. Consumption boost. Potentially, but the people in the Treasury can't really say where it will be spent. Will it be spent on imported goods and help the Chinese and the Americans, or Australian goods? The budget effect. It is affordable, so they say. They'll keep the budget in surplus. Then there's a political balance and a narrative. They need a surplus, even if it's tiny and fragile. And then they want horizontal equity, so that the same tax is paid even if different income sources. And get this, they want to maintain a 24% tax take. In this beautiful country, the aim used to be 10%. It's gone up 2.5 times under Liberal and Labor. It's an already complex tax system made more complex by offsets. And yet, out of this mess, eventually comes a better, simpler tax system. Half a decade from now, after 2 more elections, and who knows what will happen in between. People need transparency in the tax system because that's what drives behaviour. With offsets, they don't get that. People in this country feel confused, directionless, hopeless. And it's 5 years before they can get some real relief for middle-income earners. These tax cuts and tax offsets are yet another political distraction hiding the reality of economic mismanagement. The productive capacity of our country is being destroyed. Foreign multinationals pay no company tax. The weakest people are the PAYE people, which are the vast majority of Australians, frantically too busy surviving and complaining to take action. Farmers abandoned, workers abandoned, PAYE people abandoned. And yet there's a possible structural change going on in the economy right now, according to the Treasury. And now we have competitive welfareism across the states rather than competitiveness. So here are some solutions. If the tax cuts are so good, so beneficial, bring them all forward and get the benefits now, straight away. Increased economic behaviour, increased economic activity, and possibly a higher tax take. And we've seen modelling just recently, and we'll be back on this one, from the University of Queensland and the CIS on that. They can do both, tax offsets and invest in coal-fired power and water security to drive down people's costs, removing the artificial burdens on energy. They can tax foreign multinationals who currently pay no company tax, and they can do that to dramatically improve the surplus. How about this for an idea for the government? The $3 billion currently paid out of that's currently paid on subsidies could be paid out of consolidated revenue, subsidies to energy producers, because Mrs. Brown currently, the pensioner down the road, currently pays for the subsidies to multinational electricity producers and the state government of Queensland. Higher electricity prices are highly regressive. It's a hidden Greens tax. So instead of the pensioners paying for this, instead of all of us paying for it, these wacky Greens programs that are picked up by Liberal and Labor, why not have, coming out of consolidated revenue, paid for by increased revenue from multinationals? Conclusions from me, Mr. Acting Deputy President. Economic mismanagement is destroying Australia's productive capacity and potential, and yet we have an enormous potential if we get back to basics. We need to invest in productive capacity, coal-fired power, water infrastructure. We need proper tax reform and tax rates locked in. One Nation is about positive policy for managing Australia, reducing cost of living through proper economic management, enhancing security, and having a vision for future building. We need a creative, productive investment for the future. We need proper, responsible economic
Senator
management.
Roberts, resume your seat.
Thank you,
Your
Mr.
time
Acting
has
Deputy
expired.
President.
Senator Pratt.